Welcome to Regeneration, a podcast about reimagining Jewish customs in a modern world. I'm Debs Weinberg.
And I'm Eileen Levinson. And we're here to help families, friends, and chosen families revive customs with authenticity, creativity, and joy.
From Shabbat candles to everyday blessings, discover how you can weave new and old practices together across the generations to bring the people you love closer. Shabbat Shalom, Eileen.
Shabbat Shalom, Debs.
It's amazing, but we're entering the last episode of season 1. And I am grateful that grandparents have come up so frequently in each of our episodes. I've realized that I have never asked you outright, what lessons have you learned from your grandparents?
Debs, that's a great question. I've actually been thinking a lot about my husband's grandparents because they're no longer with us, and we named my son Ben after his grandmother, Bernice. And there have just been so many stories about her wisdom and warmth. And so one thing that she would love to say, and I hear repeated so many times, is to love people more than things.
Eileen, I love that you've used the ritual of naming a son or daughter for a grandparent. Now, more and more Jewish families are taking on that ritual. It's a beautiful ritual. I am excited about our guest today. She has a deep understanding of a changing world and her role in it. And I would say that Lee Hendler is actually a big change maker. She has the compassion, the patience, and the respect. And most of all, she demonstrates that you should not be a bystander, that you really need to be an upstander. Lee Hendler is a co-founder of the Jewish Grandparents Network, where she served as its first president and has remained an important board member. Listeners may be familiar with Freedom's Feast, a wonderful resource using American holidays to focus on American values and the essential part of the history of the holiday. It also helps older generations pass on traditions and share family stories. She is also the author of The Your Mom Got Religion, One Woman's Midlife Journey into Judaism. In this episode, you'll hear Lee talk about the interconnectedness of generations and how it even becomes physical, like a Shabbat twister, where everyone is connected as they lay hands on each other during the children's blessing, or in this case, the family's blessing, at the beginning of Shabbat. You know, it's such a powerful image. And as we enter the last episode of season 1, it feels like the perfect encapsulation of what we've learned. It's a little bit of the wingspan that Marshall Duke has talked about, and Rabbi Shira Stutman's imagery of kissing all of her kids' friends on the heads on Shabbat, or Rabbi Josh Fagelson's description of his children and their language, secret language that only their family understands. We're all connected. And this is the perfect time to connect with you, Lee. So welcome to Regeneration. Lee, you've also chosen to be connected as a family by having 3 generations living under one roof, which is not the norm these days.
I call us an intentional multi-generational household because it is not driven by either health or financial necessity. It is driven by a choice to embrace a family system style that was the norm before World War II and is the norm for most societies all over the world and for many of the ethnic groups within American culture. The most important thing, I think, for people considering this option for their families is to make sure that your relationship with your adult children is open, honest, respectful, caring, and compassionate. The compassionate part is so important because our default position generally is to the reference point for thinking about our children's job as parents is to think about it as the job that we had. And they do not have that job.
Lee, I want to lift up what you're saying about compassion and recognizing that the world we live in is so different from the world that you were parenting in or other grandparents today are parenting in. I am just so curious, how did you all end up choosing to live together?
It was in some ways serendipitous, in some ways the path that we were on. The people who really wanted to do this from the outset were my son-in-law and me. And it was my daughter who had the most difficulty thinking about this as a permanent arrangement. And she was very open about this. She was afraid of losing her status as an adult, becoming my child again. And we had to work through that.
I realized it was over 2 decades ago, probably now closer to 3 decades ago, that you wrote The Year Mom Got Religion, One Women's Midlife Journey into Judaism.
Right.
And I know that this was, this kind of chronicled your spiritual awakening and commitment to Judaism. And I'd read the book a long time ago. But what I remember was that it not only was a transformation for you, but also for your family.
Right.
What made you realize at that point that something was missing in your spiritual life? And why this change?
The impulse to begin to think about what was at the heart of this book, which was this experience, this decision to take Judaism seriously, happened in a civil Judaism setting. I was at the GA that was in Baltimore.
For context, the GA is the conference of all the Jewish federations in North America, the General Assembly.
Exactly. So we hosted it in Baltimore, and it was very hard for me to say, well, I can't possibly get there because it was 20 minutes away. And I decided to register and attend. And I was then considered a prominent young leader in the Jewish community here in Baltimore and beginning to take on some potential roles nationally. And every GA at that point had its must-attend session. And this one was, Will Our Grandchildren Be Jewish? Because the study had just come out that said that the intermarriage, that's what they called it at that point, the intermarriage rate was 54%. And so the creme de la creme of the organized Jewish communal leadership, lay and professional, were at this conference. What they did was they laid out the challenge of, will our grandchildren be Jewish? And as I'm sitting in this session and looking around the room, I realized that the professionals are backed into a corner. They are part of a system in which the leadership has basically turned professionals into their proxy for living Jewishly. And that the bottom line answer, if I could sort of, distill all the noise that I was hearing, and these were brilliant, really smart people, but basically the bottom line was, keep sending those checks in, folks, we got this. And I sat there and I thought, they've asked the wrong question. The question isn't, will our grandchildren be Jewish? It's, will we be Jewish? And what does that mean? And as a young leader, I suddenly had this, I guess it's an epiphany. I mean, I walked out of that session in like a complete intellectual shock mode. It was like, I'm a fraud. I'm calling myself a Jewish leader, and I know virtually nothing about my tradition that I can comfortably access in my role as a leader. I don't know how to do that. I don't have the stuff is not in there. I'm pointing to my brain, it's not in there. It's not in my heart. I have some very key notions that are based on modeling what I saw my grandparents and my parents doing. And that is very powerful, and not to diminish that at all. Taking leadership responsibility is hugely important. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? That to me is the core of Jewish responsibility and identity. But I realized that I just had done the same thing that everybody living in that room was doing, or sitting in that room was doing. And I realized that I could not do that. And so I knew I needed to study. It's like, you want to be a Jew, you got to go study. So that was the first thing that I set out to do.
Were there aspects of Judaism that surprised you once you began studying more deeply?
Oh, I just fell in love with it. I come from a progressive education background, which means that basically if you distill it, in progressive education, the teacher and the student are fellow travelers. They're discovering things together. You are not the empty, as William Yates says, education is not filling a cistern, it's lighting a fire. And boy, that fire got lit in me for the depth and complexity and grittiness of Jewish thinking and interpretation, and the idea that I was responsible, I could participate in this conversation of interpretation and actually be a part of it that stretches across centuries.
So tell me a little bit more about kind of where you see authentic Judaism, and a little more about what you would encourage listeners to take away from your own experience.
Well, there's the famous rabbinic discussion. I don't remember whether it's a Hillel Shammai story or not, but I think it's Rabbi Tarfon and another of his peers. And the question is, which comes first, study or action? And one of the responses is action because it leads to study, but the majority response is study because it leads to action. And that is, I think, at the heart of Jewish engagement around our tradition, because you're building a foundation. If you don't have a foundation of knowledge that is a source of inspiration and grounding, then your action is a little untethered. It may come from a deep conviction that this is what Jews do, and that is part of one themes of Passover. But it's no longer tethered, it's grounded when you have studied some of the sources, when you know the stories in Judaism, when you have a favorite Bible text that informs your life. And that is, I think, for me at least, it has been essential. And the Jewish adults with whom I most deeply resonate have also followed that same path. And I find them to be some of the most joyful, competent, funny, interesting Jews I know. And I learn from them all the time. I remember David Hartman used to say about his experience as a younger man studying, and guy's absolutely, utterly brilliant. He used to say, "Oh, Hillel, I was just having a conversation with him yesterday." And when he first told me that, I had no idea what he was talking about. I love that story. So that was what drew me originally, and where I found the most profound meaning.
Well, Lee, what you're saying, and I realize that you inherited this from a great teacher, but the idea of being in conversation with these texts and with these thinkers, here I am into my 40s, and this is the first time that I've really understood this idea and embraced it. I think so much of Jewish education or text study is
frontal.
Frontal, right? It can be given, there could be almost a sense of reverence that you need to have for the forefathers of Jewish thought, and to flip it around, flip the classroom, flip the conversation and say, oh, okay, What do you think? You are responsible also for molding the tradition or shifting it. That's really powerful. We talk a lot about permission, and I think that's the way that we give people permission to own Judaism in their own terms.
I think coming to study, Jewish study, with the idea that you can be a part of this if you are curious, if you are willing to ask the questions that might make you look stupid or ill-informed or not even ignorant as an adult, because as adults, we don't like to reveal our ignorance, our incompetencies, our lacks. But if you can put that aside and come to it with your childlike wonder and curiosity and your adult intellect, wow.
What is the role that grandparents can play in nurturing Jewish identity, Jewish meaning in their own families? And you did talk about how so much of what you learned really started in your family and learning at home. Tell us more about the role of grandparents.
Well, it also goes back to another, my mom had two fundamental teachings. It's easier to say yes than no. And the other one she also used to say is that children watch much more what we do than listen to what we say. And so I can't say it enough. Modeling is the thing that your grandchildren will absorb and potentially emulate. And it shouldn't be a self-conscious modeling. It should be an authentic one. You need to engage in Judaism the way that it matters to you, and to engage in a way that has, I say perfect integrity, but there's no such thing as perfect integrity, but genuine integrity. And your grandchildren just love you for who you are, just as we love our grandchildren for who, and nobody has to be performative in this relationship. That is one of the great gifts of grandparenthood. And since they love you for who you are, then show them who you are.
I think being a lifelong learner is something that a grandparent can model. It's you're never too old. It's never too late to learn something new.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think there's a wonderful quality of grandparenthood, especially when your grandchildren are very young, and it's a kind of playfulness. So it's willing to be playful with Judaism, which is two things, words we don't usually put together. But if I could give the best advice I could give to grandparents is be playful with your Jewish identity so that your grandchildren will be curious about what you do. And their memory of you in terms of your Jewish identity is being Jewish is fun and wondrous and a source of energy.
I'm wondering if we could talk, because you've brought so much of this playfulness into a number of projects over the years, and you've gotten to the essence. You've innovated so many rituals. And is there one that you've created over the years that surprised you, or in the way that it was received, or as you were practicing it, shifted your understanding of Judaism?
There are a bunch of them, but one in particular is blessing our children on Shabbat. So the first time I did this was very early in my learning journey as a middle-aged adult, and I'm standing at the Shabbat table with my husband, and we're doing a very abbreviated kiddush. And I say, I would like to try something. I mean, that's also being a little brave and confronting the idea that you're a beginner all over again. And so I wanted to say the blessing over the children. It was very formal. It was very stilted. It was very weird, but it also felt very right to me. And my kids tolerated me putting my hands on their heads and reading from a book. Probably it may have even been a transliteration at that point. The blessing over children. And the way that that has evolved over the years has been really wonderful. I can't say that we celebrate every Shabbat because we don't. That's part of the intrusion of life today. But we have added several things to that ritual that make it uniquely ours. One is my father's blessing that I grew up with, which is, thank you for the blessings of the past week and for the privilege of being together again. It just sort of, that was the keynote, the concluding note to lighting candles, wine and breaking bread, hamotzi. And then I read Marcia Falk is a wonderful writer, and she tells a story of her 4-year-old absolutely rebelling when she laid her hands on him and said, I don't want to be like Ephraim and Manasseh. And I thought, oh my God, that's brilliant. Of course. That doesn't mean anything. It may mean something to us, and we have to have studied in order for it to mean something to us. But what are we doing? We're actually being the proxy for God in that moment in blessing our children for who they are and all of their innate potential. And so I adopted her words. And may we, as parents, help you to be the person you are meant to be.
That's beautiful. So beautiful.
Another addition, and sometimes I added, and may we as parents and grandparents have the strength, the good humor, the stamina, the insight, the patience, the whatever, equality to help you do that. So and finally, my grandson added the last part, which is the sweetest and actually in some ways the most profound. One Shabbat, he's sitting in his seat at the table and his father, who is not Jewish, is laying his hand on him. And Lindsay and I are standing somewhere, and I've got my hand on Lindsay, and she's touching Leela, and I think Alex was there, my older son who lives up the street with their 2 kids. And all of a sudden, Bronson, who isn't a reverent kid, takes his foot and sticks it out and touches Alex and says, let's all make a connection. So we make this very crazy sort of like, what's the game? With the dots where you on the ground.
Oh, like Twister or something.
Yes,
yeah.
It's like Twister. It's the Shabbat blessing Twister. And everybody is figuring out a way to touch everybody else, which has a profound idea at its heart, which is that we are all blessings to one another, and we all have the capacity to bless one another. And we as adults still need to be blessed. There are other rituals. My sweet spot is writing ceremonies, is figuring out how to enter into a moment to make it ours, to own that moment. And rituals are really there. I was explaining, my granddaughter asked me this morning, what are you doing on, oh God, you're a podcast star? No, not exactly. But I'm going to be a guest on a podcast. She said, oh, I can't wait to say, what's it about? And I said, well, a lot of it is going to be about ritual. And she said, what's ritual? And it was sort of this wonderful question from a child that makes you stop for a moment to distill what this thing is, this big idea is. And I said, ritual is basically a red light. It's a stop sign. And it is anything we do intentionally to mark a moment, a celebration, a transition, something that we do even on a regular basis, but something that we do intentionally that makes us stop and be in that moment. We can't be multitasking. We can't be doing other things. We are fully present. And that's what rituals call us to do. Mark the moment, be fully present, and use the ritual to enable that.
I have a feeling that you might not even remember the first ritual or ceremony that you wrote because it just became a a muscle that you built from early on. Or maybe you do.
When this all came together for me as an adult was in the aftermath of 9/11. I have a very dear friend, Ron Wolfson, who is a renowned educator, a wonderful human being, an incredibly creative educator, a fountain of ideas. And Ron and I were talking. In fact, it's because of Ron that I wrote the book. I met him at a conference. We were totally taken with one another. And I told him the story of my midlife journey. And he said, "You have to write a book about that." And I looked at him, I said, "A book? Who would want to read that?" He said, "You would be surprised. You have to write this story. And I think you are a writer." And he literally called me every month for the next year to ask me how I was doing on my book, which did not exist at that point. And I finally said, "Okay, I will write it if you will stop calling me." And so we were commiserating about the response to 9/11, what we were challenged to do as a country. It had some innate logic to it, but basically, I don't know if you all remember President Bush giving us our charge as a nation. It was to go out and shop.
Yeah.
So we were either going out and shopping, or we were plastering American flags everywhere. And I thought, it's okay. I understand that going out to shop means that we're not stopping our lives, but that's the fundamental expression of our lives. We shop. We're a nation of shoppers. And so Ron and I were talking about it, and he told me about this idea that he had with a friend to write a Seder-like experience for Thanksgiving. This was like a 15-year-old idea, and I was totally taken with it. And I said, "Well, do you want to do anything with it?" He said, "I just don't have time." I said, "Do you mind if I tried my hand at it?" And he said, "Sure." So he sent me what they had, and Ron and I have this wonderfully honest relationship. And it was basically a sophisticated script of the Pilgrims and the Indians. And I said, "Ron, you have to be kidding me. This is what you came up with? You're the guy who deconstructed the Seder and Shabbat and it got to the essence of what each of these experiences are about. That's not what we're thankful for in this moment. That's a myth. What we should be thankful for is that we have these three foundational documents that tell us who we are. And without them, we would not be Americans. We have the Declaration of Independence, we have the Constitution, we have the Bill of Rights. Without those, we do not exist. So what if we built a ceremony around being grateful for those and gathering together as Americans in this moment?" And he said, "Oh, wow, that's a really good idea." We were at that point 4 weeks away from Thanksgiving. And this is generally how I work. An idea percolates, and then I have to have an extremely tight timeline in which to produce something. And then I do it. So I wrote the original Freedom's Feast ceremony, which was at that point called "We the People Give Thanks." And it's this massive document. We got it out to 4,000 people to test in that moment. And over the years, distilled and distilled and distilled it. That original one had 2 hours worth of content, which nobody's going to do. And so that's when I became a sort of a professional ceremony creator, not a writer, a creator, because I realized how important these can be at the moments that they're not red light moments. They're what I call red flag moments, because you're on a marathon. You're on life is a marathon. And what the red flag tells you is that you're here at this moment again. Good for you. That's what essentially harvest is about. And Thanksgiving is at its heart a harvest festival. It's that we are at this moment of harvest again. And thank God we have enough to help us get through the winter so we can celebrate this all over again next year. And we're very grateful. And that's that's what Eileen Vogelstein, the president of JGN after me and a wonderful early childhood educator, calls Shehechianu moments. The Shehechianu is not only about stopping in that moment to thank God for being there, but implicit in it is the idea that you're going to do it again at the same time, for the same reason, in another cycle.
Lee, tell us about the Dayenu Seder. You've created so many wonderful things, and I know the Dayenu Seder is one of them.
What it was about was reading the moment. And I did not think that the Jewish organized world and our wonderful community of talented Jewish educators were reading the moment. And I had, as Eileen mentioned before, I have a ringside seat. I am a constant both participant and spectator to the challenges of parenthood today. There are parents who come in and out of our house. Some of my closer friends have become Lindsay's friends. One of the things that keeps me younger is that I have 40-year-old friends. That's a wonderful thing. And so what I was seeing was the absolute exhaustion of our children in the Zoom world that they had suddenly been plunged into. And what our educators were asking, and some of it was expressed through your site, Eileen, was they were asking people to go online and spend more time online before Passover to make it meaningful. And I'm thinking, oh my God, do people really understand what is happening? The last thing people want to do is to go online. It is the very last thing that parents and even grandparents want to do, because we were being called on to play different roles. And what I saw was this moment of limited access to stuff, total isolation for families, people being bereft in the face of, an imminent, one of the most widely celebrated holidays. And it came to me one day, I said, we have to give people permission to do whatever they can, because whatever they can in this moment, it's enough. And that was like, I said, oh, isn't that interesting? I have to write something, and I'm going to call it the Dayenu Seder. I wasn't going to call it the Dayenu Haggadah, because Haggadah carries in its mind a full-fledged script for people. And what I wanted to do was to distill Passover, the Seder, to its essence, to what it was really created to do. And what it was created to do is to tell the story. All the other stuff, the rituals that we made, the 15 steps, the Seder plate, all of these are inventions to help us to tell the story. So what happens when you distill this down to the idea of telling the story and having deep conversations like the sages, the all-night conversations? We're not going to have one, but these deep conversations around the table about the meaning of this story for us as part of the Jewish people, and for us as a family, and for us as individuals. And so I wanted to distill, and I turned to one of my favorite educators, Rabbi Seltzer, who is also not afraid to break rules. And I said to him, Stuart, I want to write a ceremony that has to include only the absolute essential items and the essential elements. And so he worked with me to lay it out, and then I started writing. And it just came out of me. I mean, it was just because I know I have a collection of Haggadahs. I know what Haggadahs do. I know how they work. And I knew the moment we were in. And I'm also a decent writer. But I turned to Jane Isay, who was then a member of our National Advisory Committee, who is a wonderful...
For the Jewish Grandparents Network.
Yep, and member of the Jewish... And asked her to edit it. And Jane could not have been more delighted. And then I turned to another friend, who's the person I always turn to at the last minute, Ellen Zager to design it, because I also knew that the design of it was going to be essential to the experience of it. And often in Jewish life, we forget that. We have a lot of mediocre design and graphics and images and schlock. And I wanted this to be very clean, very compelling, very playful and colorful, which is not what people normally think of when they think of Passover. And she used the images that had been created in our library of the Jewish Grandparents Network and designed this beautiful, beautiful document.
And Lee, we should mention to listeners who might not know what Dayenu means, but this would have been enough.
This would have been enough. And what is really wonderful about Dayenu is that this would have been enough, but, and it keeps going on. It gathers steam like a rolling stone and ends up with, it would have been enough. I don't even remember where Dayenu begins, but it would have been enough if you brought us out of, Sinai and into the land of Israel. But the point is that I think it's a fundamental one. You asked about this, Eileen, earlier. Dayenu should be a grounding principle in our lives as grandparents. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to be an expert in everything. Dayenu, you are enough. And what you find in your experience and expression of Judaism is enough, as long as you are able to share it in some meaningful way with your grandchildren. And the best way to share is by doing it. And that's enough. You don't have to subscribe to some, conventional definition of what a real Jew looks like. You're a real Jew.
Lee, it's a beautiful story, and we will have to have more podcasts so that we can bring Lee back, because so much of what you talk about is not only about how to make life more meaningful through Jewish ritual and through Judaism, but also how you can bring generations closer together. So I love your beautiful example of how you connected with your grandchildren through Jewish ritual.
Thank you. This was a wonderful privilege. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. I love hearing about Lee's intergenerational housing situation. As a society, there's a lot of talk about affordable housing and how we create sustainable communities, but we don't always include intergenerational living in that conversation. And I love how all three generations live together under one roof, and how that clearly takes a sense of humor, gentleness, and respect of boundaries, which Lee is very clear about.
I realize that the Jewish community has taken on the responsibility of the family to educate their children. And through this podcast, I've been realizing that we need to bring back Jewish education into the home, which means that we as parents need to learn and study. So much of what we talk about is let's do it first. And I think doing does lead to study.
That's really interesting, Debs. One of the things that I've always been thinking about when I started Haggadot.com and now Recustom, is that what I see with institutional Judaism is there's been a lot of really great programs developed for kids. In fact, I'd say that there's become a pipeline of getting families into the synagogues with nursery schools or Hebrew schools. But I was always really interested in what do we provide for the parents who may be unsure about their place in Judaism, and they want something that's really, as Lee says, playful, but also respects their intellect. And I think that there's just a lot more opportunity for us to keep surfacing those opportunities for parents, and inviting them to also know that wherever they are right now is enough.
Yes. And I think about like a talented musician who riffs off the melody, or a visual artist who uses an original to recreate art, that there is an underlying assumption that you know something in which to recreate something else. So I hope that listeners are being encouraged to explore and to find out more through our guidebooks and to learn with someone else. And that way they'll do, and they'll also learn and continue learning.
That's really some great advice. It actually reminds me of a teacher that I had in grad school for graphic design. And he would say, know the rules so that you could break them. Because you go to this art school and everybody wants to be subversive and make work that is breaking the norms. But the truth is, we have to be intentional about what we're doing. So I'd say that the parallel here with regeneration is that we're giving you permission to break the rules. And we want to give you the tools to understand the rules as well.
Judaism is a journey. So just imagine it as wherever you're starting, that you are continuing on the journey. And I loved being there with you on this journey.
Thanks, Debs. Me too.
So this is the last episode of season 1, and we'd like to keep going. So if you're loving this podcast, please share it with a friend. You can support our work at recustom.com/regeneration.
We want to know how this podcast has helped you reimagine Jewish ritual. So please let us know what you're doing differently now that you've listened to our podcast. Tell us your stories, and feel free to request episode topics for a season 2. We're starting planning this summer, and we'd love to hear what would feel most meaningful to you. Finally, reach out to us at jgnpodcast@gmail.com if you'd like to sponsor an episode.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
This first season of Regeneration is a 10-episode journey. We invite you to join us every Friday to explore new ideas for Jewish ritual, hear from an inspiring guest, and receive tips to practice on your own. You can visit us at recustom.com/regeneration to download all of your guidebooks, see the episode list, and sign up for our newsletter so you stay up to date on everything happening with Regeneration.
Regeneration is a partnership between Recustom and the Jewish Grandparents Network,
and is hosted by Eileen Levinson and Deborah Weinberg, and produced by Josh Gilbert and Kate Mishkin.
Follow the Regeneration podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.